As we all know, I tend not to delve into just old games, of which I've done at least 2 of, although technically one of those was a port, and 3 if you count the Diablo unique item videos. But I also enjoy delving into obscure titles to see what they would have brought to the table. But occasionally, I also enjoy taking a good long look into, well, lemons, for lack of a better word. Now, the term lemon is generally associated, at least in the modern day, with terms such as defective, worthless, or unworkable. This is usually used in the automotive world, but I feel the term can be used to describe just about any kind of product that doesn't quite work, that's pretty much worth less than the sum of its parts. And given the standard of the gaming industry these days, I feel well justified in co-opting the term for the topic of today. The game is known as Nether, or more appropriately, Nether Resurrected. Now, on the surface, at least when it came on my radar some 3-4 years ago, I didn't have the hardware to really run it. Now, I kinda do. We'll get to that in a minute. And it was an interesting take on the already oversaturated market of the post-apocalypse genre, and despite my best efforts to try and justify my continued playing of the game and the enjoyment of its setting, Nether is, well, it's a lemon. And, at least in my opinion, a fairly well-crafted one, but a lemon nonetheless. Now, there is another game in the Nether series, and we will come to that here shortly, but I want to explain why I have the opinion I do. Now, I'm going to give a little context. This script has undergone several rewrites, and at the time of the first draft, I had streamed the game and afterwards got some more footage and decided to do a video on it. And as I concluded during the stream, this game was a case of someone having a good idea and somehow managing to trip in the process of running to the bank and playing a relatively weird relay event like some weird digital track team before giving up and saying, fuck it. Here's what we have. Go nuts. At the time of recording, Nether Productions Limited, the company behind this game, had already taken the official servers offline for several years, and had turned the server tools over to the community and had added a single-player mode. Now, having played games like Tribes, Warzone 2100, and the like, a corporation turning an old game over to the community when it is no longer profitable or even worthwhile to continue hosting servers, let alone support a game for a select few die-hard fans, isn't unheard of. Though, from what I have seen, I have seen them up, but I haven't really seen anyone else on them. And given the state of the game, it's understandable why. First and foremost, I will say that for the most part, Nether is built on a very solid foundation in terms of gameplay and atmosphere. Though one on the level of, say, something like DayZ, it does have survival elements requiring you to have a regular intake of food and water, though they share a single bar, which means you could potentially just load up on a bunch of water bottles and go chug, 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 chug. All of that. Anyways. The health system is fairly generic. It's a hit point system used in most shooters, though I will say that when your food bar is above a certain level, it will regenerate, handy if you are out of or running low on healing items. And given that DayZ did start off as an Arma 2 mod, I can actually let this go. You have a stamina bar, obviously used for sprinting, and oddly enough, a basic, though very well thought out leveling and skill tree system. And it does have noticeable effects on gameplay, being able to run longer, get more out of your food, be able to heal better, carry more, sneak around better. All kinds of things. Combat is pretty brutal in spite of enemies being limited in variety, with the majority of them being mainly melee focused and all of them being able to teleport around you to either close the distance or to try and gain an edge after taking so much damage. Melee weapons felt like I was actually doing some damage. They felt impactful. They felt like I was actually hitting hard. That's always nice, because I've always found that in a lot of games, melee combat tends to be a bit hit and miss. Gunplay was tense given the aforementioned teleportation, requiring you to be constantly aware of your surroundings, readjust position, watch for flankers. Oh, and watch out should you attract more attention. Noise was very much an issue there. Stealth was a thing. This game had a stealth system. You could get spotted if you weren't careful. And if you started shooting, particularly if you were in the city, well, hasta la vista, baby. Your ass is grass. Now, foes drop body parts or loot that can be used back in the canvas to trade for either cash, XP, or loot, or used in crafting. Junk found in the city can be used for this as well. The inventory system, though basic in appearance, is surprisingly nuanced, having both a space and a weight limit. You can be as strong as you like, but if something's too big, forget it, pal, you ain't carrying it. There's also a quest system in terms of courier runs or escort missions. You can even engage in what are called surges. Though I've never done one of these personally, you can also join a tribe and fight for territory, though, much like the surges, I never mess with this feature. Hell, the game even has a permadeath system. You die, tough shit. You lose your character and loot, and you start back at square one. And as someone who enjoys a good roguelike every once in a while, I can appreciate this. The sound design, from the ambient sound effects and the eerie music, take a listen. See? Pretty damn good. And in spite of the game's graphics showing their age, the ruined city you're exploring lends a feeling of hopelessness from the detritus of humanity littering in the streets. Wrecked cars, trash, even the remnants of camps and the poor saps trying to make it to safety just outside of the settlement. All of it comes together to form a unique mix in terms of gameplay and setting. Hell, a lot of gamers were thrilled to play something so different from the mainstream in spite of it being basically what amounted to an early access game. So if they had such a solid foundation, why was Nether such an abject failure? Well, for starters, the game is a buggy as hell, unpolished mess. No, yes, I know this sounds contradictory, if not outright hypocritical after heaping such praise on it. I want you all to understand something. I was praising the gameplay. The gameplay is very well done. The rest of it, you can't really excuse it. It's badly optimized, throttling the frame rates of even higher-end computers. I'm running this game on a NVIDIA 3050 with an AMD Ryzen 10, so it shouldn't be a problem even with me running it on a gaming laptop. But at the same time, given its state, I actually consider this probably a fairly minor issue, as long as it's playable. 25 to 20 frames a second may get a little aggravating at times, but at the same time, I used to play MechWarrior Online on a Lenovo ThinkPad with an Intel 3000 graphics card, running at 10 frames a second, if not even less, and it was playable. So again, minor gripe. Back on subject. Hi, Post-Production Farzi here. I know it doesn't quite look it, but there are some frame rate issues in the game. I was actually going back through the footage and didn't really notice too much in the way of issues, aside from a little bit of crispiness to the graphics, kind of PSX era. I don't know if this was a software issue with OBS being dumb or if I was just seeing things, but I have noticed that occasionally when I'm playing a game, when I record it, or if I'm streaming, I've had issues running games, but then when I look back at the stream or review the footage, the game runs smooth as butter. But there were complaints in the reviews about the game throttling frame rate. So in case it doesn't quite look like what I'm describing, this is the reason why. I don't know. Again, as stated, I don't know if it was an issue with my recording software. I don't know if it was an issue with my computer or if it's just Nether being Nether. Anyways, thought I'd clear that up. Back to the show. The map itself has issues with collision boxes and invisible walls. Getting stopped dead in my tracks while going down a seemingly empty street like I just hit a fucking force field is kind of aggravating. A good example of this would be when I was basically trying to creep around a group of critters on the other side of a barricade, and I got stonewalled, running into what seemed to be a wall in the middle of a perfectly clear path. Or when I got stuck at the top of this ramp out in the hinterland after I tried going back down when I went up and was forced to drop down and take damage. I repeated this several times to make sure it wasn't just some random one-off incident in an already buggy as hell game. Nope. Typical fucking bullshit. Going through objects that I shouldn't have been able to. Being forced to maneuver around. Or enemies for that matter. But no, I could just pass through some of them. Not to mention that when I was in the subway station, a place I knew for a fact when I first started playing was relatively safe from critters, save for a few stragglers wandering around. Nope. Enemies can apparently see through fucking concrete 20 feet down, or even more, and will warp down, which hilariously leads to them getting stuck in walls. And yes, they can't attack you, but you can't get at them. Not to mention they can teleport out as easily as they teleported in. And isn't that just dandy? Shame, really. Used to be a really good place to get half-decent loot. Water. May as well be quicksand at this point. In spite of the places being flooded, you can't swim, and you will drown. There's no swimming mechanic in this game. And God help you if you get stuck even a little bit like I did here, because there's almost no escaping that. Then there's the terrain, the grass, the buildings. They're floating. They aren't properly placed. And in spite of the attention to environment, there are areas that are copy and pasted. Sure, they're done up well enough to give a little bit of variety, but still, it's pretty obvious at times. Enemies can be pretty badly animated and occasionally not work right, or even register getting shot, like this flying fucker here. He seemed to get stuck in a few frames and basically did a T-pose at me while I was plugging away at him with a shotgun. Not that it seemed to do anything. At least until I got to ground level, and even then, as a result, I wound up getting a pretty good chunk taken out of me. It even had vehicles at one point, albeit badly programmed ones. These were removed before I started playing. Not to mention the looting. Now, I will give credit where credit is due. The devs made looting in Nether pretty easy. Mainly in the form of highlighting lootable containers. Not a bad choice. It keeps them from having to set spawns for individual items, but occasionally you'll come across locked containers. Be they campers, crates, coolers, or fucking sleeping bags. I wish I was joking on this, but I'm not. You need keys, and for that, you'll have to get them through the global market, which brings us to our next subject, the global market and inventory. Now, this actually makes sense in basically what seems to be a multiplayer MMO or an attempt at one. The global inventory acts as a stash, enabling you to store up to 500 size worth of items and letting you keep a stash of kit on hand to give your character a leg up when you inevitably bite it. But the market? This is what leads me to the second reason I believe the game failed. Microtransactions for basically what amounted, as stated before, an early access game. You can see where this is a problem. Granted, this isn't exactly anything new in the industry. Look at you, EA. Now, here's the rub. In its current incarnation, the global market uses the in-game currency, but this wasn't always the case, which brings us to the final points. As I was going through the Steam reviews and of course my own footage, it painted a pretty ugly picture. This game originally started being made by a small team of devs, and even though it was extremely popular, their resources, I guess, at one point became strained. So when faced with the choice of being forced to close their doors and let all their efforts go to waste, they sold it to another company who, in hopes of getting resources, who immediately proceeded to dump an assload of paywalls into it while offering little of actual value to the game. Not to mention cheaters were rampant. They were a rampant problem for the longest time. This is not conducive to a game's longevity. The original devs were eventually able to wrest the creative rights back and rip all the pay-to-win shit out, but by then the damage was done. The game's reputation had tanked. The player base had seemingly moved on. Even though they'd rolled back a lot of the changes, it wasn't enough. So eventually, for either a lack of resources or interest in the game, it was abandoned. Though there were talks of making it open source, but these seemed to have fallen through, and eventually it was taken off the Steam store. Now, this wasn't the end. Nether was eventually picked up by another company, given a fresh coat of paint, and called Nether the Untold Chapter. Amazingly, in spite of the new dev's faults, of which there are many, they did manage to optimize it better so it doesn't tank your frame rate, add a few new enemies, and took the time to link both the global inventories of the first and last game. I learned that one the hard way. And then went, looky, new game! While still playing the same buggier, albeit tidier original. Long story short, the original, as one reviewer put it, it's a Frankenstein game. A labor of love that essentially got sodomized by a corporation for profit because of the original creators' attempt to get a larger team and more resources. Reclaimed by the original devs and eventually abandoned, hacked back together in a new form by a new studio that doesn't give a damn about it. It's a shame, really. Nether had a lot going for it, and all it really needs is some genuine love from a studio who actually cares. Now, while it is no longer available for purchase, and I don't know why you guys would want to try this. I mean, if you guys want to, I'm not going to stop you. But you can still buy Steam keys for it on sites like G2A. I don't recommend it, mainly because there's better uses of your time and money, and as for Untold Chapter, well, don't. Just don't. Anyways, I've been Farzy. If you enjoyed the content, leave a like or hate it and move on. Peace out.